Well, I'm going homeschool today, or old school. No slides, Dan, no slides. I wore a blue blazer like a pastor's supposed to because it's graduation Sunday. Got an Oxford tie so I look a little more educated. And I want to, if I could ask to indulge you for a second. I have a principle in preaching that I try not to make the pulpit an avenue to talk about me or my family, to make it a big, like I'm the star of the show. I'm not. But I just indulge you that this is my final daughter's graduation. I've had 3 other children before her graduate from this church, and you guys have been tremendous. But I was thinking, what do I want to say to this class? What do I want to say to my daughter on her graduating day? Would I say the same old bromides that you hear at most graduation ceremonies? Stuff like, follow your dreams and dream big. Would I say, you just need to be the best you can be? Or how about, don't be afraid to fail because failure paves the road to success? Those are good. Or would I be funny? Say something witty. There's a famous graduation message out there. It's supposed to be written by Kurt Vonnegut, but it's not. And I've probably heard it about 4 times, but it's funny. And the person says, the best advice I can give graduating class is, number 1, wear sunscreen. And everybody like, that's funny. Do one thing every day that scares you. Floss, dance. Don't read beauty magazines. They will only make you feel ugly. Remember the compliments. Forget the insults. And again, trust me on this, wear your sunscreen. I don't know if I want to say that one. How about this one, the Winston Churchill one? Never give in. Never give in. Never, 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 never. And nothing great or small, large or petty, never give in, except to conviction of honor and good sense. That's a great one. That's a great one. But as I was reading before studying for this message, I have a message that if the students took this to heart, if you take this to heart, you will stand out from the crowd like nobody else. This is such an exciting message. It'll change your life if you live it. We find it in the book of Matthew as we continue on in our Sermon on the Mount series in chapter 5 and verse 43. You want to have a great life? You want to be different? You want to have impact? It's right here. Matthew 5, 43 and 44. Here's what Jesus says. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say to you, and here it is, love your enemies. Love your enemies. And pray for those who persecute you. Do you want to change the world? I mean, be different? Don't just follow your dreams. You want to do something that will make a splash on the world? Love your enemies. Nobody does this. In fact, what we are doing is we are wrapping up. If you haven't been with us, we've been going through a part in the Sermon on the Mount that I've been calling the Spiritual Dentistry series, which means that Jesus isn't going to just stop at the surface of his message. He's not just going to clean your teeth. He's going to drill down where the cavities and the root canals are. He's going to get into our soul. And so really, starting in verse 21 of Matthew 5, we have been going through what I would call this series where Jesus takes the law as the Pharisees preached it, and then he says, well, let me go a little deeper. He would begin, like if you look at verse 21, he will start off by saying, you've heard it said by those of old, you shall not murder. So he goes to the Old Testament law and says, you shall not murder. And then he says, but you really want to know the intent of the law? Don't hate your brother or be angry. or call anybody a fool. In verse 27, you've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. And he says, but I say to you, don't look at anybody with lust in your heart, because that is like committing adultery. So each time, he's going to take it further. In fact, what he's doing is he's pulling out what verse 20 means. Look at verse 20. Verse 20 is one of those verses I think the whole book of Matthew can rest on to some degree. Most of Jesus' teaching is trying to explain verse 20. And here's what verse 20 says. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Some of you are like, well, who are the scribes and Pharisees? The best way to put it is the scribes and the Pharisees are the successful people in religion of his day. They're the ones that graduated with the highest honor when it came to religion. They're the ones who want success and are being the best version of themselves. They believed and they taught that the best performers of the law of God are the ones that are the most pleasing to God. Pharisees were competitive. They believed the more righteous I was, the more I was able to fulfill the law, the more I went up the ladder of success to God. Sort of like a graduation ceremony. We want the students to be successful, to take off, to be better than others. Really, we don't say it like that, but that's what we mean. We celebrate the highest grade, and for good reason. I mean, valedictorian, salutatorian, because they worked hard. What an effort, but often we say they're the best. And so the Pharisees were the best of the best. If you want to look at Pharisees as a sport, the best sport, I would say that it perfectly sums up the life of a Pharisee when it comes to religion, is they're like great golfers. That's the sport they'd play. Golf is, number one, it's individual. I am trying to beat everybody else and have the best score. Number two about the game of golf, you better know the etiquette. You better walk on the golf course the right way. So you can't, if you're going to a swanky golf course, you better have the right kind of shirt. It better have a collar, the right kind of shoes. Your clubs better look a little bit better than, my clubs, the ones that I get at the garage sales. And if somebody's putting and they're getting ready to putt, when I first started because I thought it was a competition. I remember going to a nice country club. My friend belonged. We went putting, and he's getting ready to putt on the green. And right when he went to hit it, I go, hey, to see if I could mess him up. And I didn't know you don't do that. I thought it was a competition. No, that's bad etiquette. So in the same way, the Pharisees have this etiquette. When you come into church, you better be quiet. Do you have your tie on? Do you genuflect by the pew and make sure you're very respectful of God? It's kind of like when you go on a golf course. You better know the etiquette. Second thing about golf is the person with the best score wins, and the best score is the lowest score. By lowest score, it means you have the least errors. The Pharisee who sins the least is the best. The religious person who is good, right, pure, he's probably closer to God than everybody else. And then the third thing about the sport of golf is you always have that group that are the elite, the untouchables. Nobody's like them. Everybody else really is a peasant as compared to those guys. Did you know who's on the PGA Championship Tour and is winning it right now? Phil Mickelson. Phil Mickelson's always been one of the best. It's like 20 guys that are always at the top, and all the rest are kind of like me, the guy in the woods, looking for my ball. I feel bad for Caleb Hoskins. He works at this really nice golf course called Pilgrim's Run, and I asked him, see if he can get me on. Caleb never wants to get me on, and I know why, because people would say, who is that guy always in the woods? Well, that's my pastor. I don't think he wants to say that. Not one of the elite. And so the Pharisees, they were the elite. And then look what Jesus says in verse 20. He says, for I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. So what he said, then none of us are going to make it. None of us. We don't have a chance. And what Jesus is trying to say is the Pharisees have taken the law as a way to get to God, and that isn't the purpose of the law. If you would take the law, if you go in the Old Testament and take the law and put it in a pot and boil it, and then let the steam rise, and you know what you would have left? What is the intent of the law? One word that we find in verse 43. It's the whole point of the law. It's actually the very first time this word is used in the New Testament. And that word is love. That's the whole point of the law. Even Jesus, they asked him, what's the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your strength, your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. The point or the intent, or if you drill down past the surface of the law, what God wants you to do is to be someone who is agape or agapeo love, which is God's love. In fact, go to the book of Luke. Very first time the word love in the book of Luke is Luke chapter 6, verse 27. And Luke is, this is mirroring the Sermon on the Mount, and this is Luke's Sermon on the Mount. But it's a little more trite and hard-hitting to me. So Luke 6:27, he says it really clearly. First time he uses love. Jesus says, but I say to you who hear. So to those who have ears, those who are able to take it as instruction, let it change them. Here's what he says. Love your enemies. Why does he say it like that? So love your enemies. Your enemies is what I'm going to call as a clause that gives meaning to the word love. We can say love. Why doesn't Jesus just say love people? Because by saying love your enemies, it highlights what kind of love he's talking about. It's a different kind of love. Like if he said just love your parents, okay, yeah. Love your kids, yeah. Love your enemies? Oh, wait a minute. He's talking about something different. That's why he uses that clause. He says it for two reasons. He uses your enemies for two reasons. Number one, it distinguishes the type of love he's talking about. It wasn't the kind they were used to. If we go back to verse 43 of Matthew 5, listen again to how he says it. He says, you have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. And then he puts a caveat on there, pray for those who persecute you. Oh, that's what you mean by love your enemies? Second reason, it's really the true intent of Leviticus 19:18. They warped it. Look at verse 43. This is how the Pharisees would preach it. They would preach Leviticus 19:18, which says, love your neighbor, love those within your own household, love those in your community. And then what they would do is they would contrast it by saying, and hate your enemies. So you shall love your neighbor, stop right there. That's where Leviticus 19:18 stops. And then they added, and hate your enemy, because they wanted it to sound like a contrasting syllogism. And they got hate your enemy from interpreting the imprecatory psalms. That's a fancy psalm that when often David would pray to God and said, God, you hate those people that are against your people. And I hate them too. And so an imprecatory psalm is not actual hatred of somebody. It's explaining the world from God's point of view. It's not an action. I'm not going to get an imprecatory psalm. All I'm saying is the Pharisee added that to the actual law, to hate your enemy. It wasn't meant to be on there. It's just love your neighbor. Because it's easy to love those who love you, but God's love is different. God's love is special. God's love loves everybody. So if we look at this, look at what he says in verse 46. And this is really going right at the Pharisees, and you got to let this sink in, because this is really strong language. Verse 46. For if you love those who love you, so if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? I mean, it's not special. Everybody loves those who love them. And then he says, don't even the tax collectors do that? If you know anything about the Pharisees, they always pray that out. Thank God I'm not a tax collector. I'm so much better than them. And Jesus is saying, are you really? You're just like them. The tax collectors love their people too. They love the people in their mom, their son, their daughter, just like you guys do. Well, how is that any different? And then in verse 47, he goes after another group. And you greet only your brothers? And so the Pharisees and the Jews would really only recognize other Jews. But everybody else they would consider outsiders and wouldn't even include them. And he says, and if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Don't even the Gentiles do the same? The Gentiles were the Romans and Greeks who worship pagan deities. And he's saying, even the Gentiles only greet other Gentiles. The idea is, I remember in the 1980s, if you're a historian, in the 1980s, there was a Cold War going on with Khrushchev and Reagan. And Reagan threatened and would stockpile the warheads. And Khrushchev was threatening he would wipe us off the face of the map. And so this group, Sting, who's from the police, sang this song, and it said, I hope the Russians love their children too. That's the only thing that's going to stop the war. And they do. I mean, the point is, the only thing that is going to really stop the war is love for your own people. And Jesus says everybody loves their own people. We could say even the Russians love their own people. What's so hard about that? But if you love your enemy, now we're talking about a different kind of love. Do you have that? Do you have that? Here's his point. We can come to church and sing songs about loving our brother, and we think we're loving because we love those who love us. But it's really like the Academy Awards. If you go to the Academy Awards, they're giving awards to people who are already in the in-group. And people watching on TV like, that movie stunk. But they're really impressed by each other, aren't they, Bob? They're really impressed by themselves. This is what Jesus says. You're impressed by loving your family, so you're impressed by natural love. I'd say it like this. Before I really knew Jesus, I have a big family, youngest of 6, and we would dress up to go to church. We'd slip into church, and they'd say, give each other the sign of peace. And I can remember shaking hands with my sisters and my dad and my mom, and I felt like, look how I love my family. Don't I? And then we'd leave the church, wouldn't talk to anybody. And then we would go together as a family, we'd change and go to the beach together, and we'd still love them. What's the difference between church and the beach? There's no difference. Some people like small churches. You know why they like small churches? Because you're family. No, you're all related. That's why you like small churches. Who can't love their immediate family? This is Jesus' point. I'll just be honest with you from a pastor's viewpoint, and this might sound a hair cynical, and I don't mean it to be cynical. I just want you to think through this a second. Actually, we had a men's retreat. We had 70 men there, and I got to be honest with you, it was great because all the men were mingling and talking to each other. But every once in a while, you'll go to a retreat or you'll go to church where what naturally happens, here's the natural way things happen, people will hang out with those that they have something in common with. Either they have same interests or they have done stuff together. So when everybody gets together, they find that person they know, and they go and they walk over there. That group knows them, and every once in a while you have all these groups, and then you have a few people that are kind of looking around, don't know anybody. So what normally happens, and this is the way it operates, is you know who talks to those guys? The pastor. That's his job. He talks to them. And I feel bad for him because here's the reason why, if I could be honest with you. If they have a terrible time, they go home and they talk to their wife, and their wife said, how'd it go? And they said, well, I don't like that church. They're not too loving. When they say they don't like that church, usually they're saying, I don't like that pastor. But who's the church? Isn't it everybody? Church is In the Greek, the assembly, all of us. What if we would reach out to those we have nothing in common with? We see somebody sitting alone and they look sad. What if we just go try to learn them? I don't know. That's the kind of love Jesus is talking about. It's different, and it's nowhere to be found in the world. It's special. So he says, love your enemies. Who are my enemies? Well, verse 44, it's pretty simple. My enemies are the people who persecute me. They're the people that mock me. They argue with me. They laugh sometimes at me. They irritate me. They offend me. My enemies, when I was growing up, were Pittsburgh Steelers fans. I wouldn't give them I'm a Browns fan. They had this place in the Browns Stadium where it was so stupid. It was known you don't go on this 50-yard line because people from the Steelers and the Browns would drink beer and they'd get drunk and they'd fight at the 50-yard line on the second row. It's so dumb. So dumb. It's kind of like that conservative or that liberal online that always argues with you. It might be that guy that dresses like a girl and has funny hair and he talks funny. Shouldn't he be a guy? Yeah, but he thinks he's a girl. You mean I have to love him too? Yeah. So how do I do this? That's where verse 38 and 42 come in. So verse 38. So Jesus is going to refer to the law again. And I want to show you, so if you look at verse 38, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. So Jesus is referring back to, and I want you to go there, Deuteronomy 19 to 21. This is important. Deuteronomy 19, verses 15 to 21. Deuteronomy is the 5th book in the Bible, chapter 19. So this is what Jesus is referring to. But you have to see it in context. Because what the Pharisees like to do is take stuff out of context and it changes the whole meaning. We learned that last week about oaths. We learned that about divorce. They change everything. And they use it for their own selfish advantage. So here in Deuteronomy 19, look at verse 15. It says, a single witness shall not suffice against a person for any crime or for any wrongs in connection with any offense that he has committed. Only on the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses shall charge be established. So he's talking about, in context, court, a courtroom. And if somebody has a case against somebody else, it can only be tried if you have 2 witnesses. That's what he's talking about. So look at verse 16. If a malicious witness means he has bad intention. He wants to hurt the other party. So if a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, then both parties to the dispute shall appear before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who are in office those days. So they're going to have priests and judges presiding on the case, hearing the witnesses. So if you notice, I keep saying it's a courtroom, a public case. Verse 18, the judges shall inquire diligently, and if the witness is false witness and has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him as he meant to do to his brother. The point of that is to say, this is to stop false accusations and malicious betrayal of your brother. So it's a law intended to curb injustice. And then he goes into this, verse 20, and the rest shall hear and fear and shall never again commit any such evil against you. Your eye shall not pity, mean as a judge, you shouldn't just be light on the sentence, be pretty heavy on the sentence. Why? Because it will be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. The purpose of the law here is to actually stop false accusation and malicious aggression against somebody else. So the intention of the law is to keep peace and order. The Pharisees used that personally. So if somebody punched me in the So if Jared comes up, and he comes up and punches me in the face, the Pharisees will say, you have every right to punch him back, retaliate, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And what happens, it started a whole personal vendettas, vengeance, more chaos. This isn't about peace. And so the Pharisees would say, you can go get him, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. No, that was only for the judges to use. How do I know this? Look what he says in verse 39 of Matthew 5. So verse 38 says, but you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who's evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. So he's saying when it comes to personal attacks, don't retaliate. Don't retaliate. It's about personal retaliation. If somebody insults you, let it go. Somebody offends you, let it go. Why? Love your enemies. People don't do that in our culture at all anymore. They don't. We want vengeance. We even will take people to court because they called me the wrong name. What? It's kind of a retaliatory world we live in. So he keeps going in verse 40. If anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. So if a poor person who doesn't have an undergarment, you have a couple of them, you really, according to Jewish law, should give them that tunic. But if you don't, they could take you to court. But Jesus says, don't just give them the undergarment, give them your coat, give them your cloak. And the idea is that, don't worry, I'll take care of you. Jesus would often say, it's better to give than receive. It's an ethic of love, not an ethic of rights. It's an ethic of others, not an ethic of self. And then verse 41, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. The idea is that in the law, that time, Rome could ask somebody to help, ask a Jewish man to carry their pack a mile. And he says, you know what, instead of fighting against the law, just say, hey, I'll go 2. I'll help you. Man, if we had that attitude toward teachers and coaches and policemen and even leaders in the state, instead of always seeing everything as a offense against my rights, and I'm trying to be the best citizen and most helpful person I can be, Christians would shine. Because it's love. It's love. God loves all people. Look at verse 45. So I'm supposed to love like God. That's so hard. But look at verse 45. Why do we love like this? So that you may be sons of your Father who's in heaven. And look what God does. He makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. So what this is called is common grace. God is kind even to people who hate him. We were at the Buckner's place yesterday where there's a nice river. It's the Muskegon River, and it flows gently down. And we jump in there because yesterday was hot. And every once in a while, especially probably today and yesterday, people will also go down that river drunker than skunks. They'll get that big circle inner tube, and in the middle they'll have a big, like a big cooler full of all kind of beer and schnapps and all kind of whiskey, and they're drunker than skunks. Why will God allow them too to enjoy the sun and the beautiful cooling water? Why doesn't he sink their boat? Cause them to drown. It's funny, one time I was doing a wedding. A lot of people rent this out to do a wedding. And I can remember, it's what I'd call one of those sketchy weddings. I don't know if you know what a sketchy wedding, I make sure the music they're going to have for walking down the aisle is like, could you not have the F word when you walk down the aisle? Is that okay? Oh, Pastor, you're one of those pastors. Well, no, I just think it's not. We're here to, marriage is also to worship God. And I can remember getting ready for the wedding, and the groomsmen were those guys, probably had like 17, 18 tattoos on their body, and they just wanted to get ready for the service. So I got to get the groom and the brides ready. And I went to this back room back there, and in that back room, they were all just chugging beer. Now, we kind of have a policy in our church not to really have beer in here. And the reason why is if a deacon walks in there, he might grab one too. And I don't want that to happen. That's not why. So I went over there and I said, can you guys just do this outside? Just do it outside. And they're mad at me. They're like, yeah, whatever. We let you borrow our church. Can't you treat it with a little more respect? God gave you life. Can't you treat this world with a little more respect? It is his world. That's the point. If God can allow people to live, and he lets them live, and even makes them, can't you? That's hard. I want to fight. One person wrote this. Human love is awakened by attraction to what pleases it. So, for instance, I love a beautiful face, or I love somebody who can make me laugh, or I love somebody who has common interests with me. It's easy. God's love creates what is pleasing to it. God made the world ex nihilo. That means out of nothing, he created. That's also God's love. It creates something out of something that wasn't there in the first place. And that's hard to do. So, if you want to change the world, graduate, love your enemies. Or I'll just give you another illustration. What kind of sport is Jesus referring to here? Not golf. Do you know what sport he's referring to? Rugby. So graduates play rugby. Why do I bring rugby? Because I play rugby. And when you play rugby, everybody has to get involved in the game if you're going to win. Everybody gets dirty. Everybody gets bloody. Nobody gets the fame. It's everybody working together to win. Golf is about me. Rugby is about sacrificing your body for the sake of the whole. What is our goal? To glorify God in our midst. And when you love your enemy, people will say they will know you're Christians by your love. And it really is not loving your brother, it's loving the enemy. You want to change the world, graduate? You really want to be a different person? You want to be somebody that people will say, why are you so kind to me when I've been so wretched to you? I'd love to tell you. It's a guy named Christ. Let's pray.